Trump's asylum rule is already changing the border. On a gray morning, a group of Haitian migrants chatted idly on a quiet corner in downtown Tijuana, near the U.S. border, speaking French and eating Creole and exchanging cell phone chargers to use later in a nearby Starbucks. Among them was René Raphael, a 28-year-old former medical student. Like most of the roughly 4,000 Haitians now staying in shelters in Tijuana, Raphael has spent the past few years as a nomad. First, he fled Haiti, which suffered a devastating earthquake in 2010, for Brazil, where the country's construction boom provided work. When Brazil's economy cratered last year, Raphael and his pregnant wife made a harrowing two-continent trek north to the U.S.-Mexico border. Their goal? Asylum. Their hurdle? The same executive order that calls for building a big border wall. Legal or loophole? Little noticed in his flurry of immigration-related executive orders, President Donald Trump has pushed to change the way the United States handles asylum, a designation sought by a growing number of migrants looking to enter the U.S. Traditionally, asylum is granted, or not, to people who fear persecution in their home country based on things like religion, nationality, and politics. But over the past 2 years, the asylum process has changed, with thousands of migrants seeking to gain asylum by turning themselves over to immigration agents at the U.S.-Mexico border. Last year, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, which deals with asylum claims, handled 94,048 cases, nearly double the 48,042 cases the agency handled in 2015. And more than 16 times the 5,523 cases in 2009. Many of those asylum seekers end up in Southern California, including in Los Angeles and Orange County, both before and after their claims are processed. Trump is moving to change the asylum rules. In the same executive order that calls for building a wall along the U.S.-Mexico border, the president also declared his intent to speed up the process for handling asylum claims and build detention centers to house those attempting to cross the southern border. Critics say Trump's plans upend international norms, which include fair hearings for people seeking asylum. Supporters say it closes a loophole that's been abused. While the bulk of asylum seekers arriving at the border are from Mexico and Central America, a growing number have traveled longer distances. Nearly 19,000 immigrants from outside Latin America appeared at California's border with Mexico last year, up from 5,700 in 2015, including more than 6,000 people from Haiti, about 3,500 from India, 2,500 from China, 1,800 from Cuba, and hundreds from other countries in Asia and Africa. According to data provided by U.S. Customs and Border Protection, their arrival has overwhelmed American immigration officials and presented new security issues even as the Trump administration tries to beef up enforcement along the southern border. The challenges that we're facing now, with respect to the flow of people crossing the border, are very different from the challenges that we've faced in the past, said David Aguilar, a former acting commissioner of U.S. Customs and Border Patrol who served under Presidents George W. Bush and Barack Obama. Asylum seekers have very different needs, he said. The requirements for dealing with them are different, and therefore the workload is different. For the migrants, that workload means waiting. Though Raphael's wife eventually gained entry to stay with relatives in Miami, Raphael remains in Tijuana, with thousands of others in limbo. To tell you the truth, I don't know what I'm doing here, Raphael said. I don't have a future in Mexico. I have nothing. I don't have a job. I just stay alone, watching TV, buying food. Chaotic system. Even before Trump issued his executive orders on immigration enforcement, the flood of asylum seekers was straining resources at the border in Tijuana. The result, according to migrant lawyers and advocates, is a system rife with abuses. The procedures, the policies have changed almost every other week, said Patrick Murphy, a priest who runs the Casa del Migrante Tijuana, a shelter that has housed more than 2,000 migrants from outside of Latin America since last May. You try to adapt, to set things up, and then boom, the policy changes again. So it's been a challenging 9 months. At the crossing between Tijuana and San Diego, where Border Patrol agents are equipped to process about 100 asylum cases each day, U.S. immigration officials responded to the flood of migrants last spring by referring new arrivals to Mexican authorities who would schedule appointments with border agents. But Mexican immigration agents were ill-equipped to handle the influx and often turned people down, something they're forbidden to do under international law. According to migrant advocates, a complaint filed with the Department of Homeland Security last month by immigration rights groups protests what they say has been a systemic denial of entry to asylum seekers at southern border crossings, including the San Isidro port of entry near San Diego. The main problem here is that Border Patrol agents have zero authority to make determinations about the validity of asylum claims, said Ian Falabaum of the Innovation Law Lab, which works with immigration lawyers. But border agents are telling people that they can't apply for asylum, that they have to go back to the Mexican authorities. With Trump in office, Falabaum said, migrant advocates are already seeing signs that his hardline immigration agenda is emboldening immigration officials to turn away additional asylum seekers at the border. CBP, which oversees U.S. Border Patrol, insists that its policies on asylum have not changed. CBP officers are not authorized to determine or evaluate the validity of the fear expressed, agency spokesperson Ralph Dizio said in a statement. The applicant does not have to specifically request asylum, they simply must express fear of being returned to their country. He added that we don't tolerate any kind of abuse in the asylum system. But it is clear that the influx in asylum seekers has strained the U.S. immigration system, stretching the resources of Border Patrol agents, asylum officers, immigration court judges, and detention facilities run by Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Unlike migrants caught crossing the border illegally, those who say they fear returning to their home countries are afforded an interview with immigration officials who determine whether that fear is enough to warrant asylum in the U.S. If a migrant's fear is deemed credible, his or her case then makes its way through U.S. immigration courts, a process that can take as long as 3 years. In recent years, that system has become swamped. It is a tremendous workload increase that takes away from enforcement efforts, said Aguilar, who now works as a principal for the Washington, D.C.-based security firm Global Security Innovation Strategies. The whole system gets impacted. As asylum claims are processed, migrants are detained by border agents in detention centers run by Immigration and Customs Enforcement. But because of the overwhelming number of claims, many have been turned out on parole, a practice that critics say encourages other migrants to declare asylum. Right now, the system is not working efficiently because it is so overwhelmed, Aguilar said, and unfortunately that creates an even greater draw for people seeking asylum and an even greater flow of people at the border. Cracking down. Trump has promised to crack down on what he terms asylum fraud as part of his broad plans to stem both illegal and legal immigration into the U.S. His executive order calls on the Department of Homeland Security to build detention centers along the border and to relocate asylum officers and immigration judges to those facilities to speed up the processing of asylum claims. The order also directs the agency to review its policies for granting credible fear interviews and asylum claims. Many believe this suggests the administration will take a narrow view of what qualifies migrants for asylum. Proponents of stricter immigration enforcement welcome the shift. The order focuses a lot of attention on the broken border process, and it goes way beyond the wall, said Dan Cadman, a policy fellow at the Center for Immigration Studies, a Washington think tank that supports restricting immigration. This is setting up multiple defenses to reduce the lure of declaring asylum at the border, Cadman added. It returns the asylum and refugee process back to what it was meant to be, which is a benefit of last resort. Some of the policies outlined in the executive order, including the construction of detention facilities and the hiring of immigration judges, will take time to implement and require funding from Congress. Already, though, Border Patrol agents have seen a shift in the way the agency operates under the new administration, including how it handles those seeking asylum, said Christopher Harris, Legislative and Political Action Coordinator for the National Border Patrol Council Local 1613, the union that represents Border Patrol agents in San Diego. Harris declined to provide details on any specific policy changes DHS has implemented, but said that morale among agents has increased since Trump signed the executive orders on immigration last month. "Before, we were just letting people go," he said. "Now, that's changing, and it's changing for the better. People have hope that the system will run the way it's meant to be run." Immigration advocates concur that additional resources are needed to process asylum claims at the border. But they also worry that quicker processing of asylum claims, combined with a narrower view of what qualifies migrants to gain asylum, could result in asylum seekers being denied access to due process. Expedited processing is good, in the sense that it makes the process more efficient. But it could also dramatically reduce the chances that an individual will actually win asylum, said Faye Hipsman, a policy analyst and California program director at the Migration Policy Institute. And in the absence of concrete policy changes and additional resources for asylum officers and immigration courts, legal advocates fear that Border Patrol agents will take it upon themselves to interpret Trump's executive order. "There's a lack of guidance and clarity in between policy and implementation of the executive orders," said Royce Murray, policy director at the American Immigration Council. "Given the combination of that ambiguity and the sentiment conveyed in the executive orders, it makes sense that the situation at the border will be more chaotic. It could be a free-for-all," he added. In the meantime, migrants continued to arrive in Tijuana. Murphy said a group, mostly from North Africa, appeared at the Casa del Migrante last week. "I think this is just the beginning," he said. "I joked that they came here for the American dream, but they might have to settle for the Mexican dream." Thanks you for watching. Please subscribe 24 Hours News channel. Goodbye and see you again.